Welcome to the David Spisak Show. I am beyond excited today because I have the opportunity to spend time and in turn have you be able to spend time with somebody that I have a tremendous amount of respect and admiration for, and that is Michael Dunne. Michael Dunne is the global leading authority on EVs, and EVs have had a lot of airplay over the last year, 2 years, and beyond, and for good reason. It started out because obviously they were going to be what was going to save energy and save municipalities and save lives and save the car business. And all of a sudden, in a what seems like a sudden twist of fate, we saw EVs starting to decline last year in terms of sales penetrations around the world. We've seen countries pull back like Germany, Sweden, and others on their incentives. And we've seen OEMs who have committed billions of dollars seemingly looking like they're ready to moonwalk, like Michael Jackson, back on some of those commitments because of some sagging demand. But I think it's really important. The timing of this is critically important because Michael is by far the leading voice and authority when it comes to EVs. And for anybody out there that thinks, hey, this movie is done, you haven't seen anything yet. So without any further ado, Michael Dunne, thank you so much for coming back on.
David, thank you for having me. I've been very much looking forward to this conversation.
I have too. I mean, I literally have. I could have this conversation with you, Michael, literally every month, like a regular feature, because there's just that much going on. And I want to make sure that I'm respectful of your time. So over the course of the next 25, 30 minutes, I really want to turn it over to you because, you know, the last time that we got together, you had sent me something, an article that you had posted. And I believe my memory is not perfect. It's not eidetic, but it went something like this: why everyone other than Tesla should be terrified of BYD. Am I close?
Absolutely spot on. Nailed it.
Pretty good memory, right? Going on the ripe old age of 65. Well, this time, this time you send me an article that is going to be published soon on talking about when every car is made in China. And it just sounds preposterous. It sounds beyond far-fetched. But as you get into it, and I want you to get into it, it's anything but far-fetched. Would you agree?
Absolutely. You know, the numbers are there. The numbers don't lie, David. So first off, China, as many people know, surpassed Japan last year to become the world's #1 exporter. So you have BYDs and SAIC MGs and Volvos and Geelys flying to markets all over the world, more than 100 markets worldwide. But what's much less well known is that global automakers themselves from the West, from Germany, United States, Japan even, are also turning China into their global production hub for exports. So some examples. Ford brings the Lincoln Nautilus back to the United States. GM brings the Buicks here. Ford is exporting 100,000 SUVs to Southeast Asia. Volkswagen, Stellantis, Renault, all exporting from China back into Europe. Yeah? One after another. It's Tesla, the largest of them all. It exports hundreds of thousands of cars from China to markets worldwide. So we have this 1-2 punch, David. On the one hand, the Chinese are gearing up to export globally very low cost, affordable quality vehicles. Then on top of it, we have our own, the Western automakers saying, hey, that's not a bad idea. Why don't we too make China our production base for the world?
And
we
Michael,
haven't seen like this before.
So I hearken back to the 80s. I remember in the 80s when Hyundai first burst on the scene, and around that same time, a company called Yugo, right? And it was laughable. This car is $4,900 as a new car, but I would joke that, you know, if you were in a head-on with a grocery cart, that you would pray for the person in the Yugo. We used to laugh about the quality, so to speak, you know, scoff at the quality of cars that were coming out of China. We shouldn't be scoffing anymore. Is that true?
Not at all. Not at all, David. I had the opportunity recently to test drive several of the leading brands out of China, including, for example, BYD and Geely Zeekr. And with me were dealers, veteran dealers from the United States, who who have seen every make and model for the last 30 years. And they came away highly impressed, not just with the price, but also with the fit and finish and the quality. So I asked them, hey, for example, if today Hyundai's, killing it in the United States and elsewhere, if Hyundai's a 10 out of a 10, where would you put the Chinese brands roughly? And I was expecting them to say, 5, 6, maybe a 7. And they paused for a long time, David, and they said, I'd say 9, 9.5. They're right there. Now, not all Chinese automakers, but at least the ones we were testing, they felt were comparable to what Hyundai offers. And that's a shocker, I think, for most people around the world who are used to thinking of China, yes, cheap, but not China, yes, quality and innovation. So get ready, world. I mean, they're coming.
I don't know. It's interesting when we take a step back, because it's almost like, the last time that we probably put our eyes on that or gave it any attention, there really was some significant quality gaps. But it's been years, and it shouldn't really come, I don't think, as any surprise when you see the technological innovations that are coming out of China and the companies that are relying. I mean, they're literally putting their brand name, like Apple, on Chinese manufacturing, and their manufacturing and production is near flawless, right?
It really is. I remember when I was president of GM Indonesia for several years, and at that time, the people in China told me 6 of GM's most efficient, highest quality plants in the world are in China. So what more do you need to know? 75% of them are in China. That's one. The second thing that's not well known outside of China is that from the 90s and 2010s, global joint ventures were formed in China. And those global joint ventures brought suppliers, first-class suppliers like your Lears, your Denzos, your Bosches. They all set up camp in China, built dozens and dozens of factories. And guess what? The Chinese automakers say, we don't have to do that work. We have them in our backyard. That was a big plus in terms of quality and leapfrogging that process of developing their own suppliers. The second one is, David, and this is just as important, about 10 years ago, Xi Jinping, the leader in China, said, how do we infuse our auto industry with innovation? And he more or less said, let's throw the door open to the Elon Musks of China, guys who have made billions of dollars in the tech industry. They know internet, they know software, and let them come into the auto industry. And that's exactly what we've seen happen. Most recently, just last month, a new company called Xiaomi, the second largest smartphone maker in the world, is now producing a Porsche Taycan lookalike that starts at about $30,000. So you've got, my goodness, like, whoa.
Where do you go with that?
Yeah. What do we do with that?
But it's more than this is, the more you unravel, as they say, unpeel the onion, it just keeps going and going. I kind of harken back to an incredible story that somebody shared with me 100 years ago about how Walt Disney managed to put together the 49 square miles of land that it took to build Walt Disney World. And if you could imagine back then, I mean, even then when you didn't have the internet, obviously, but people weren't dumb. There were some sophisticated people back then, and there was a point in time where you could buy parcels of land and patch them together. But there's another point in time where somebody starts figuring out what you're up to, and they're going to block it. And he was smart enough to use proxies, right? And he had all kinds of proxies that went out, and they bought this quilt of land that ultimately allowed him to own. I never knew that. Yeah, it's a pretty extraordinary story. Now, the reason I bring that up is it's almost the inversion here, in that you would think that China had some master plan. 40 years ago, they're in a lab and they put a map of the globe, and we're going to dominate the auto. How are we going to do it? Well, we got to get these guys. We're going to get Bosch and other suppliers here. We're going to go get the greatest technological minds. We're going to invite them to come in. Okay, we're going to get GM to start building here. No, we volunteered. We just came. We literally volunteered and say, here's our plot of land. Go ahead and build your Disney World. Their Disney World is the entire automotive ecosystem. True?
Absolutely true. No need for proxies. All hard work was done.
What are we doing?
The money, the capital, the know-how, the design, the processes. We handed it over. thinking that there was going to be this understanding. We're going to give you the technology, but guess what? We will continue to have access to your market. Well, it hasn't played out that way at all, just the opposite. We're seeing Western automakers' share of the China market dive, while Chinese are continually dominating their home market and then starting to extend themselves into global markets. So, yes,
it wasn't too many years ago that I found the astonishing fact at that time that the number one importer of vehicles into the United States was not Korea, it was not Japan. As it turned out, it was General Motors. General Motors at that time built more vehicles overseas, whether it was Mexico, whether it was in Asia, and imported them than any import car company on the planet. And so it's interesting because from that aspect, it's a continuation. It's almost like, well, gee whiz, they've got the quality and they've got the facilities and we don't have to deal with unions. Labor is cheap over there. That sure sounds like a great deal. It sounds like as good of a deal as we use this often, Jeffrey the giraffe at Toys R Us saying, boy, I think it'd be a good idea if we gave our customer data and our list and our inventory to Amazon. What could possibly go wrong, right? Saying, and we know, your entire company's gone. So what do you make of this? In other words, and what's next? Because, you bring up some very salient points and it's viable, the roadmap that you kind of create, because you say, okay, well, hold on. If we're playing chess here, we've got the suppliers, we've got the Elons, we've got the major manufacturers. And you also mentioned, talk about the supply chain. In not just batteries and minerals, but the entire supply chain, right?
Yeah, this is a problem for the West, even more so. Say we're just being generous. We say, hey, why not? If you could manufacture it more cheaply in China, go ahead, build our cars there and ship them back to us, and we'll save money for our consumers. But the story goes much deeper than that, David. Just as you said, the trouble is that those cars are put together made of inputs of parts, materials, that we know as supply chains. And every day, every hour, China's supply chains run deeper and stronger, and ours grow thinner and weaker. So if global automakers and Chinese automakers decide to make China the export base for the world, then all the supply chains move there, and our own cupboards are empty of capabilities, of skills, never mind how many thousands of jobs would be lost. So it's a case of, well, wait a second, we might be able to save money on a per unit basis, but what's the long-term cost to our nation? One example, you mentioned GM. GM used to be the poster child for U.S. business success in China. At a peak, GM was selling 4 million cars a year in China, making $2 billion in dividends. We used to call it the profit machine when I worked at GM. Today, sales are down by more than half from that peak. And in the most previous quarter, GM actually lost money in China, this first quarter of 2024. Because sales are down, that means they have a lot of capacity. What are they doing with the capacity? They're turning around and shipping Chevys built in China to markets worldwide, including to Mexico. So much so that China is now the number one supplier of vehicles to the Mexican market. I mean, if that's not going to get people in America's attention, nothing will. The number one supplier of cars to Mexico is China, and GM is a major player in that export push. So are they at the gate or what?
You can't make this up. And, I think it's laughable at times that, you hear things out of the current administration that basically says, hey, don't worry, I got this. We're going to block these guys. We're going to do this. You have no move. You're checkmated. You were checkmated 10 years ago. The thing that I don't understand is I'm fascinated by it. But you look at, despite Tesla's declining market share, the reality is, of the 53 or so EV models that somebody could have purchased last year in the United States, the Y and the 3 outsold the other 51 combined, right? I mean, the X fell dramatically, the S did as well. But the other ones that were non-Teslas, they got their behinds handed to them. There's only a handful of them that even can lay claim to 3, 4, 5% market share, which is tiny. And what really confounds me, Michael, I'd like to hear your take on this. I can't imagine ever saying, going through a conversation where somebody said, got a great idea for a business. Okay, we're going to build this electric car. Okay, it's going to be amazing. I mean, look at what Tesla did. They didn't spend $1 on marketing. It's going to be amazing. These people are like a cult. They'll buy anything, whatever. And then you say, well, where are you going to get the batteries from? Well, China. Okay. Okay, well, they're responsible for 85% of production for battery. Okay. And then, but we're also working, don't worry about it. We're going to start mining some, lithium and cobalt and nickel. And okay, well, who's going to refine that? Oh, China. They do 92% of that. I don't understand in what world does it make sense to go into a business where you have no control of your supply chain, nor any control of your cost of the biggest, most expensive component in an EV.
Yes.
And yet, your what will be your now biggest competitors globally, they could put out a quality car for $10,000, $11,000, $20,000. Oh, the solid state battery we've got coming, they've got it already. Oh, 400-mile range, they got it for under $30,000. In what world does it make sense for OEMs over here to continue to make any type of a commitment towards the EVs?
The famous book, The Art of War, Sun Tzu, he begins by saying, know your enemy and know yourself. And in 10,000 battles, you'll never be in danger. So our issue, just as you point out, is that we didn't think this through carefully enough. We don't know the strength of our adversary, that is China. Up until very recently, we came to realize, oh my goodness, they totally control the supply chains. In particular, you mentioned processing. So even if we have the mines and the minerals, guess what? We need to ship them over to China, get processed to bring them back to North America. How inefficient would that be? And then, as you said, we're vulnerable to cost fluctuations. And oh, by the way, China decides tomorrow, no graphite for you guys. It's like a showstopper. So what to do in this situation if we're thinking strategically, and if in fact we are engaged in kind of I call it a Cold War? Maybe the answer is to play off the Middle East versus China. Why run into electrics when we're not ready? And why run away from oil when, for the time being, it kind of makes sense for us? And why not negotiate one against the other? Say, electrics are nice, but we have other options. So, the Biden administration is taking great strides with the IRA to encourage investment in batteries, but most of that has gone into battery assembly. We still haven't solved the problem of the supply chains, and that's a 10-year play. So let's not jump into electrics and say, yeah, right? 10 years easily. Let's not jump into electrics, which China would love. Oh, yeah, you're going to go electric. You need us. Take our time. I'm not saying back away. We still need to build critical minerals that will feed an EV industry. But China took more than 10 years to get where it is today. That's going to be a reality for us, too.
It's so interesting to think about, two of the dominant forces out there, whatever anybody thinks about them. When you think about, AI and AI chips, and you think about EVs and how they're dominating the conversation, and EVs have put China essentially on the map, right? For now on, and chips have done the same, for Taiwan. So both of these things were done in broad daylight. There was no Trojan horse needed here. This was broad daylight. And, for us to say, oh, well, we're just going to go start building our own chips. Okay, see you in 5 to 8 years. Okay, you don't just flip open a factory, and it's the same thing with the EVs. You don't just open up a, gigafactory and start producing batteries. So what is your take long term? Because, this article, and by the way, if you don't, Michael, where can people find you if they're as interested and fascinated by the depth of knowledge and experience and expertise you have? How can they connect or follow what you're putting out there?
Thank you so much, David. The easiest way is just go to www.dunneinsights.com. There you'll see our newsletter, the Driving with Dunne podcast, and other relevant data focused on EVs and focused on sort of what automakers are coming out of China, out of Asia these days.
Okay, and then with that, tell me, so where do we go from here? Is there something? I mean, it would seem to me logically that your point was a great one with respect to, and go figure, you can't make this stuff up. I'll tell you what we should need to do is make the Middle East our. Wait a minute, didn't we want to go away from them? I thought the whole point of EVs was we were over-reliant on OPEC, and so we're going to save the world and we're going to free ourselves, liberate ourselves. We're good here, and now we're like, no, retreat, go back to them. Tell them we were. So anyways, but is the best move from your perspective for the American OEMs and the economy as it's driven by the automotive industry, is the best move to pivot dramatically towards hybrid?
Hybrid and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles seems to be, I'm one of those people who likes to strike a balance, and it just happens that plug-in hybrid electric vehicles make a lot of sense, in particular for the North American market. So if you allow me, just back up just for a moment on how we got here. So I call it the trifecta, a confluence of things that happened historically. One seemed like ages ago, but remember Dieselgate and Volkswagen getting in trouble and them promising to invest in Electrify America and making right and going electric and all the rest. So that's a big moment. At the same time, China was making its Made in China 2025 plan. We're going electrics, we're going batteries. That was another government-inspired moment. And then you have this third thing called Elon Musk, this phenomenal entrepreneur who says we can go electric. So those three things were moments in time that caused the world to suddenly say, oh, the future's electric, let's get there in a hurry. But if we took the time to look at driving habits, let's just call them driving habits in North America. What does your average American like to do? Highways, high speed, long distances, maybe throw in some towing and some hills. And these characteristics are exactly the thing that batteries do not like.
Yeah.
Like you took a poll of batteries. Batteries, what do you think? Is this hell for you or heaven? Oh yeah, that would be in the hell category. We don't like that driving at all. We like city driving, short commutes, no hills, temperature decent.
You know what's fascinating about that? I know you. What's fascinating about that? That sounds an awful lot like my 1965 Mustang and my 1970, whatever it was, 76 Firebird or 73, right? No. You don't understand. I got to have the temperature between 50 and 69 degrees. I can't go over 70 degrees. There's no hills. It's good. You turn the air. Hey, somebody turn the air conditioner off. We're losing power. It sounds like Scotty on the Star Trek, right?
That's exactly it. And nobody, when the idea of electrics comes into the picture, no one goes, well, wait, what do Americans, how do they drive? And for this reason, to your point, we want to come back to, you're going to see more and more demand for plug-in hybrid electrics and hybrids because they're just practical. They solve range anxiety. They're here and now. They're a fine alternative to battery electric vehicles. So,
well, this did not happen. The great Scott Galloway, I mention him often because the guy is brilliant out of NYU. And that saying that he has that, it's amazing how long things take and shocking how fast they happen. This is one of those examples from an OEM's perspective or certainly a dealer's perspective. It's like, where did this come from? It feels like all of a sudden, you know better. This has been happening and coming about over a very long period of time. Just like I mentioned with NVIDIA. NVIDIA is not some overnight. That's a 30-year overnight success story. They're, oh my God, NVIDIA. This guy's been around for 30 years. This guy served up, by the way, NVIDIA as a concept to the CEO of AMD, who famously said, worst presentation I've ever seen.
Worst ever.
This $2 trillion company. This guy, it'll never work. Never. Right there, the Hall of Fame with the Nokia guy. Right. So it's crazy, but And I was going to mention,
related to them, thinking of BYD, which started out as a battery maker for cell phones back in 1995. 10 years later, invested bought a bankrupt car company, and for the next 10 years, made very mediocre cars.
Yeah.
Everybody's like, BYD, I don't know yet. And as recently as 2019, 2018, 2019, I visited them. Their sales year on year were down. So if you'd asked me 5-6 years ago, BYD, auto industry, global, I'd say it's hit, or I don't know about this company. Well, several things went their way, and they worked hard, and they hired world-class designers, and they had a breakthrough in their battery in 2021, and suddenly they're king of the hill. But it's never that obvious until we see it in hindsight.
But by the time, it's kind of like, again, those cars in the 60s, we had what was referred to as idiot lights. They literally call them idiot lights. It's almost like by the time your oil light came on, you felt, oh, idiot, you should have changed the oil, but it's almost like this is like we have an idiot light on industries. And by the time you see the light, you're late. You're just so late. Michael, I want to continue this, and I would like to boldly call this part one. Can we continue this conversation?
Absolutely.
Okay, because so for everybody who took the time to listen, I want to thank you. I would be shocked if you did not find this as fascinating and compelling as I do. Please take the time to go to www.doneinsights.com, because this is literally the tip of the iceberg. If you follow Michael, follow his podcast, you're going to get the best information. You'll hear all kinds of rhetoric about EVs, but you should go to the source and go to Dunne Insights. And Michael, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to share this. I'm going to call it part one because there's just so much more I'd like to ask you. But I'm going to share this, and guys, we'll get this up. I mean, obviously you'll be hearing this soon, but just know this, that we will get part two up as soon as Michael's availability will allow. But Michael,
in particular, David, if as a preview, I just came back from Vietnam and visited this company called VinFast, which is a fascinating story all by itself. So maybe we get into that next.
I would love that. And I may even make this a field trip. It's that worthwhile, so that we could sit in those two chairs behind you, and I'll have my cameraman just shoot right there with Dunne Insights in the background. But I'm wishing you all the best. Safe travels. Thank you for taking the time again. We will get back together, hopefully in the very, very near future, to continue this conversation. But for those who are listening, please take the time to not just visit doneinsights.com, but also share this out so that we can get Michael's views and his expertise out to more people. And as always, I appreciate you taking the time to join me here on the David Spisak Show, and I will see you next time.